The Stories That Shaped Us is a limited series podcast by the National School Public Relations Association. Produced in celebration of NSPRA's 90th anniversary, these voices, these stories seek to honor the legacy of NSPRA and explore the evolving role of school communicators and the future of the profession.
From a breakfast table to a national network. Like any story of notable growth, the National School Public Relations Association, they started small, but they were driven by a core set of ideals. And now, 90 years later, the association is thriving as the leader of school communications, support, and expertise all across the country. This is the Stories That Shaped Us podcast. Hello, my name is Mitchell Rausch, and I'm fortunate to be the communications director at Grand Island Public Schools in Nebraska. And I've been tapped by NSPRA as a fellow school PR pro to journey through this podcast adventure alongside influential voices in the industry and alongside you, our listeners. And in this episode, we'll go deep into the founding purpose and ideals that drove NSPRA in its early days all the way through to today, 90 years later. The group of NSPRA's original 23 founders was 1/3 educators, 1/3 writers, and 1/3 crusaders who had exchanged ideas for 10 years on better techniques and methods and materials for reporting and promoting the progress of public schools. And what drives that work of promoting progress in public schools? Well, as our two guests will tell you, it's collaboration, it's trust, it's transparency, it's expertise, and even friendly connections. In other words, the work of school public relations is at its best when we embrace the concept of we are better together. And 90 years later, that still rings true. But this isn't just a history lecture, it's a story of continuity. So today's guests weren't there in 1935, but they carry the legacy of that moment. Through their reflections, we will explore how NSPRA's founding ideas still shape who we are nearly a century later. We'll hear from Joe Lowenthal, APR, and Kathy Leslie, APR, as they unpack the importance of integrity and the power of face-to-face communication and how NSPRA has both transformed and stayed the same in its pursuit of anchoring public school communications. This is the Stories That Shaped Us podcast. Episode 1, From a Breakfast Table to a National Network.
My name is Joe Lowenthal, and I will add APR behind that. I worked in school public relations for 22 and a half years in one district. And I've been a member of NSPRA for 47 years.
Joe Lowenthal, APR, has had a storied career. One might even say the man has done it all. Before joining a large district in Virginia Beach to serve as their communications director for over 20 years, Joe was a teacher. And before that, he was an Army intelligence officer, then a radio newsman and a newspaper journalist, and then a radio news director. Overall, Joe has been a member of NSPRA for 47 years. And even served as an NSPRA president for a term. Also, it might be good to mention that Joe is 91 years old. And I only say that because you wouldn't know it by listening to our conversation. The man jumped on a Zoom call with no problem and dove right into talking about the importance of public schools, the vital role of school PR, and how NSPRA has been there every step of the way. Here's his story. Joe, you know, the reason we're talking to you, as my friends at NSPRA shared with me, you were categorized as a longtime leader and influencer in NSPRA. And I know you've seen a lot over your career, even though you weren't there at the very beginning. Talk to me a little bit about how did you get into school PR and how did you get connected to NSPRA?
First of all, I'm not really sure I was aware of NSPRA's mission or its identity when I first joined. When I did become aware, it all fit with the experiences I'd already had. I was a high school drama teacher for 4 years early in my career. Of course, I was always eager for the public to see the plays that we presented, if for no other reason, to show off what public education could produce.
The concept of promoting the important work inside schools is obviously something you've been heavily involved in, even from your teaching days.
Yes, indeed. Absolutely. But I know that NSPRA's founders wanted to help the public better understand and support public education. So I think that just about everything I did in 22 years on the job in school PR, the mission may not have always been at the forefront of my mind, but inherently I knew that it was the primary objective. So even when things were not going as well as they should, I don't think I ever lost sight of that mission.
The mission, no matter how it's worded, in this kind of work, it stays the same.
Well, I began in 1978, which seems like a very long time ago now, but it was a rather circuitous journey that I took to get there. As I said earlier, I was a teacher, then an Army intelligence agent, a radio newsman, a newspaper editor, and finally a radio news director of a top radio station in the market at the time when I was recruited by the superintendent of schools in Virginia Beach. Turned out to be my dream job.
That's a happy accident to fall into, right? When you get the opportunity to do something that changes your life.
I mean, I was very fortunate because the first PR director in the district had joined NSPRA and had set up what I would call a textbook operation. So I joined NSPRA and the Chesapeake chapter of NSPRA the first week that I was on the job, because I knew I needed all the help I could get.
You wasted no time. You jumped right into the network.
Absolutely. Then with just 3 months under my belt, I went to my first of 23 NSPRA seminars. The first one was in Portland, Oregon, and I lived in Virginia. So it was an overwhelming experience being there, a very positive, overwhelming experience, I might add. Mm-hmm. I learned so much, and well, the camaraderie was probably the most outstanding thing about being there. Everyone wanted to be helpful. I'd never known that kind of thing before in my life. So I knew I'd found a home.
I'm so encouraged to hear you say that, Joe. We were talking before we actually hit record, your legacy in this career, and you asked me how long I've been doing this thing, and I've been doing this school PR thing for, I'm going into my 5th school year, but in some ways I feel like I've only been doing this for 5 minutes. But
exactly.
one thing that's been universal, though, is you talk about everyone. When you joined the NSPRA network, everyone was so willing to collaborate and be helpful, and it felt like home. I'm telling you, Joe, that was exactly my experience here. I came from the private marketing sector and joined public education and joined NSPRA specifically, and I was blown away at how collaborative and generous with their time everybody in this industry is. And I think that's indicative of the work that we do. Would you think?
Absolutely. And there's probably 3 things that stand out most in my mind. First, from NSPRA's expertise to begin with, their willingness to help, the networking that you mentioned, and the friendliness.
Yes. You joined in 1978, and those were cornerstones of your experience. And here we are in 2025, and this has stayed the same. And I think that's a good thing.
Absolutely. Of course, I just attended for a couple of days the 2025 seminar in Washington, and it hasn't changed a bit. It's the same old thing. Everybody's willing to work with you, and it's the willingness, the network. It's amazing.
Reflecting on your career and everything that you've seen, because as you mentioned, you're kind of a Renaissance man. You've done an awful lot in your career, but specifically in the 2 decades plus you served in your district and being connected with NSPRA for so long, who did you work with or learn from in terms of old leaders or old guard, earlier generations that maybe influenced you, and what stayed with you from those experiences?
That's an interesting question, and I will tell you that I even was fortunate enough at one time to have a wonderful conversation with a man by the name of Dr. Edward Bernays, as
Mhm.
if you know, is the father of public relations. And it was a wonderful thing to have a conversation with Dr. Bernays, uh, just to talk about public relations. And he was a friend of NSPRA's as well. But, it was the current leaders of NSPRA at the time that I joined that had already spent years perfecting the mission of NSPRA that I interacted with and learned so much from. I mean, like Dr. John Wherry, Don Bagan, Dr. Ken Muir, Larry Askoff, Patrick Jackson, Ann Barkalow, Bill Jones, just to name a few. And those are names that are enshrined in the history of NSPRA.
There's some heavy hitters there.
Not only did I, of course, become friends with them, but they were also my mentors. I mean, I could probably never have been successful without them collectively. Their drive and their expertise, their positivity, their willingness to help, and their determination to fulfill NSPRA's purpose were just inspiring.
The way folks are willing to share their wisdom and their experiences, and how that spurs on future generations. And that seems to be a common through line for those of us in this industry and those of us that are active NSPRA members. Looking back, we've talked a little bit about collaboration and the willingness for people to share and to mentor you and everything. What are some of the values or ideas that were shared with you from some of those mentors that you think remains consistent still throughout NSPRA and in school public relations?
Well, I think that they're the same as the foundational values. I mean, the ones that I found when I first joined, as I've mentioned before, their expertise, their willingness to help, and of course, their friendliness. As I've told you, I've been a member of NSPRA for 47 years. And as an NSPRA board member, then as president, I did all that I could to carry on those values and pass it forward. I mean, truth and transparency were always my guides.
Thinking back to some of those conversations you had with those early mentors of yours through the NSPRA pipeline, what's one nugget, one piece of wisdom, or one conversation that sticks out to you that maybe really helps shape the way you view your work?
Not just one. I don't think I can narrow it to one, but again, I go back to the same values of expertise, of networking. As much as the organization has grown and expanded its scope of coverage, it still seems to me to be the same organization that I joined in 1978. And
Mm.
everything about it still remains. And I go back to the same values every time.
Expertise, especially that word is so important, I think, to what NSPRA does. Why is it important for us to be seen as experts?
Well, today so much more so than it did at the time that I began my career with NSPRA. I think that, I mean,
Mhm.
things weren't easy at the time that I joined NSPRA. And at that point, my job was mostly to produce internal and external publications, to search out the good things happening in the school district, write a few news releases and send those out, write superintendent speeches, and sometimes be a spokesperson for the district. Now, I
Mhm.
emphasize the word sometimes because at that point, the superintendent was the primary spokesperson for the district.
Yeah.
I had a chair in the superintendent's cabinet meetings, but I was told by my predecessor I was there to listen, not to contribute unless I was told to do so.
Wow.
So let me again give you an example. I came home from my first NSPRA seminar, all fired up about an adopt a school program that Larry Askoff had developed in Dallas. And I presented it to my superintendent, thinking this is the greatest thing that ever happened. His reaction, no, we don't want those people in our schools.
Wow.
You can imagine how deflated I was at that. I might add, though, that several superintendents later and before I retired, all of our 78 schools had multiple adopt a school partners. And another example, early in my career, we had a crisis incident involving a football coach and a female student. So when the story broke, my superintendent sent me home so that I would not be available to the media. Thankfully, all that has changed with public relations practitioners today being what I see as equal partners in cabinets and influence and the primary spokesperson, especially in a crisis. So I'm sure NSPRA's founders would have been very proud of that.
Absolutely. So, I mean, there's a lot there, Joe, and some of it's sobering to hear, right? It's encouraging to see how much this industry has evolved over the years, but to hear stories like that, where it's a very sobering thing to hear, and I'm grateful that that's not the common practice these days anymore, but that is certainly a reality that you lived early on in your career in school PR.
Well, I guess that I would have to say that we did not have in these early days the respect sometimes within the school district itself and certainly in the communities. We were looked at as spin doctors who were there to cover up problems. People didn't understand really what we were trying to do. So yeah, we've come a long way, baby.
We sure have. Oh goodness, we sure have. So what would you say was probably the most important thing to you in helping to get people understanding that you're there to build trust and to be authentic and to be transparent rather than being a spin doctor?
John Wary, when he was executive director of NSPRA, always used to say, and I'm paraphrasing here, but there are 4 parts to good school public relations. Number 1 was do a good job. Number 2 was do a good job. Number 3 was do a good job. Number 4 was tell somebody about it.
There it is.
That core advice is the same thing that still carries on today.
Do a good job and tell somebody about it. You've talked an awful lot about the founding principles, the values, the experiences that you had early on. What parts of NSPRA's founding purpose do you think matters the most right now in 2025?
The expertise on all things communication. And NSPRA does provide that. Again, the willingness to help, the networking of the people in NSPRA and the friendliness of everybody in the organization. Nothing has changed in NSPRA's 90 years. So I'm grateful that NSPRA was my guiding light throughout my career in school public relations. There's no other way to put it. It's been amazing. It's been a great run.
Joe, I just want to say thank you so much for your influence and your commitment in this space. I think it is safe to say that you were instrumental in helping shape what school PR is today. And so we owe you a debt of gratitude. So thank you.
I appreciate that. And I'm sure that some of the other people that you have talked to have told you much the same things. It's just inherent in us after all these years.
I'm Kathy Leslie, APR, and I've worked in school public relations for about 45 years.
Kathy has seen so much in school PR, she could write a book. Well, actually, she did. Literally. Kathy wrote one of the go-to books on the importance of valuing and practicing face-to-face conversations in the arena of public relations. And if you know Kathy, it all makes sense. Throughout her 45-year history in the profession, Kathy's work has taken her across the globe. And in those 4 decades of school PR work, she's led districts, she's served as an NSPRA president during a turbulent financial season, she's facilitated comms workshops, she's earned her APR and master's degree. To say that Kathy has seen it all would be an understatement. And in that time, she's held true to the same ideals that drive NSPRA. There's power in connection, there's power in building trust, and there's power in thinking strategically. Here's her story.
I started out at the University of Hawaii. I had a double major in television and radio broadcasting plus languages. I also attended the University of Puget Sound a year later. I'm majoring in education, so I suppose I started communicating about schools in 1965.
Wow.
And I received my first job as a school communicator in 1979 in the Gresham School District. I had been teaching most of the intervening years. I left Gresham School District to accept a position as a director of community relations in Spokane. It was a much bigger job and set me up to accept a position in the Beaverton School District as a director of community involvement. Beaverton was a light tower district. My job included conflict management, lobbying, management of elections, overseeing publications, volunteers, and at that time, technology, which was in the beginning stages. It was at this time that I began to see the value of face-to-face communications. I retired from Beaverton in 2000. Then I went to KSA Plus Communications as a senior project director. This work took me all over the nation. I was convinced that face-to-face communications with parents and neighbors doing meaningful work was really important. And it was important to have diverse perspectives in dialogue, such as discussing strategic planning and curriculum development. It was critical, actually. And so, for example, the governor in Virginia just said that parent involvement was critical to him. And that's the reason why he won the election, actually. And so
I believe it.
5 years later, I started my own business and wrote The Politics of Authentic Engagement and a workbook to go with the textbook. And it's for, I saw at the last convention seminar that it was for sale still. So it hasn't been selling really fast. So,
well, I'm sure.
But
I'm sure there's still some really good nuggets in there that are still valuable, which is why it's still being promoted in this regard. So there are some things. I mean, I am still young in my school PR career. There are some things that are still just the salient truths, like you're talking about that parent involvement piece. That's never not going to be important in the work of school communications.
That's right. I had an exciting and wonderful career.
It sounds like you've not only seen a lot, but you've been fortunate enough to go to a lot of different places and learn about those communities and those cultures that make those communities rich, which is wonderful. You know, working for 45 years in this arena, even though you weren't there at the very beginning of NSPRA, in what ways do you feel like you were connected to NSPRA's early mission and identity?
NSPRA's identity, I think, is education. I would not have had the career I had if I had not taken advantage of every educational opportunity. Actually, that was extremely important. And I was afforded many, many educational opportunities during my time, such giants as Bill Bannock, Gary Marks, James Grunig. I learned so much at the seminars and various opportunities to speak, such as the Annenberg Project, the Kettering Foundation, and Public Agenda. And I learned much more when I was speaking at those opportunities. So yeah, I think their identity is education.
That has to be a cornerstone of it, right? Because that concept of how do we continually get better, professional development, being lifelong learners, there are always skills we can refine or hone or new things that we can pick up and tactics that maybe we need to start unpacking. I really resonate with what you're saying, Kathy, with NSPRA's core identity being rooted in education.
Right. I think that's the most important. But the other identity is fun. I had so much fun as a
Good.
member, going to seminars, serving as an officer and president. It was a great deal of fun. We would have sing-alongs afterwards, and Steve Nag would play his guitar and we would sing, and it was just fun.
Of course we want to have fun. The people that you get connected to is such a meaningful part of the NSPRA experience. And
Right.
I don't know why you wouldn't want to be making fun memories with some of these people that you get to be connected to because of this opportunity.
And that, it was just, we laughed a lot. We cried a lot.
Yeah.
I formed lifelong friendships with members of NSPRA.
That's so wonderful to hear, because again, tracing through the different eras in the 90 years of NSPRA's operation, that is one thing that has remained constant, because that's my experience as well, and that was your experience. And so I think that is really intrinsic into who NSPRA really is. What was your time as NSPRA president like, Kathy?
Right then, we were coming out of a financial crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very, very difficult, actually. But we saved the organization, and the director, Bagan, had to really be strict with our money, and so he was very, very good.
That's encouraging to hear. I had a chance to talk with Rich and hear his perspective on that season as well, of how to work through all of that. And it was incredible to hear some of the things that he learned along the way about what worked and what didn't work, in terms of really trying to double down on what you do well while still being responsible financially.
And we did some things extremely well. We did strategic planning. We did new kits. We did everything. We did a lot well. And so
makes a difference. So thinking about that, Kathy, if the founders of NSPRA were listening to this conversation today, what do you think they would be most proud of, in your opinion?
I think they would be most proud of how NSPRA grew. Some 3,000 members now. And so I think they would be most happy with that number. And they would also be proud of how the board has continued to set new goals and continues to do strategic planning. They would, of course, they would be proud of how NSPRA pulled itself out of the financial crisis and continues to flourish. And so I think we've lost a lot of members along the way, but I think that they would be most proud of this era, of these things.
The growth that NSPRA has seen, especially in the last 7 years, has been incredible. And that, again, is, I think, indicative of these core values and the experiences and the growing PD and the veterans pouring into younger career professionals. And it just builds over time. Right,
exactly. And there were so many young people. Of course, I'm older, so
you're more experienced.
Young to me.
I like to say more experienced instead of older. Yeah. So that's where you're at, Kathy. You're more experienced.
Right.
And so when you think about NSPRA and its purpose and what it seeks to do and how it seeks to provide support and to be the leading experts in this field, what do you think still matters the most in 2025?
For me, of course, it's face-to-face communications. I was extremely pleased with Marketplace, and I thought that there were a lot of good programs there, but they were all using technology. And I know that technology brings in more people, but I think that the face-to-face communication is still the most important. And of course I would, because I wrote a whole book on it.
You have thoughts, but you know, again, talking about something we mentioned earlier, those salient concepts or evergreen, right? The things that are always true. There is something to be said about an interpersonal connection with somebody, sitting
Right.
down with someone, looking them in the eye, sharing energy, and unpacking something, whether it's complicated or fun or whatever. There's something to be said about the mountains that can be moved through that channel of communication. And I'm sure you've seen that a lot.
Yes, exactly. And it's really important that when citizens are called in, that they do meaningful work and that they have diverse perspectives. And it's through dialogue that we really find answers to the problems. And I think that principals have to encourage people to parents and others to bring problems forth and to really create an environment that is problem oriented so that people feel free to state what issues they have.
That's such a good word. That is such a good word, Kathy. And again, the voice of experience, you've seen a lot. And, but that diversity of thought, that diversity of representation, that diversity of voice, and the ability to embrace dialogue, no matter how complicated, because there's got to be a common goal. And I know I say this in our district all the time. We try to find the common ground because we all want what's best for kids. Well, you've certainly been an instrumental part in moving this profession forward and making us better, making school districts better, and influencing, I think, in a positive way, the way NSPRA supports its members and school communities. So thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
It's through thoughtful dialogue and diversity in both thought and representation that we find answers to the problems. Now that's a good word. Now, while NSPRA may have started at a simple breakfast table, the ideals of which NSPRA was founded continue to anchor us today. Connection, collaboration, clarity, transparency, trust, all of it helps us lead the way as we champion our public schools. Because yes, we are, in fact, better together. What began as an exchange of ideas would spark a national movement, and one that still guides us today. We salute NSPRA for changing the game 90 years ago, and for continuing to be innovative and thoughtful and at the forefront of school communications.
The Stories That Shaped Us is a limited series podcast by the National School Public Relations Association, produced in celebration of NSPRA's 90th anniversary. Special thanks goes out to host and producer Mitchell Rausch, executive producer Sarah Laughlin, NSPRA Executive Director Barbara Hunter, APR, and you, our 2,900 plus NSPRA members. Be sure to visit nspra.org for membership information, professional development resources, and more. Thank you for listening to The Stories That Shaped Us.